Hey everyone, welcome to this new edition of Open Air presented by the Harvey B. Gantt Center. My name is Dexter Wimberly, and I'm excited to have a fantastic conversation with today's guest, Willie Cole. Willie Cole is an important contemporary artist whose work has been the subject of several one-person museum exhibitions at institutions, including the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, Bronx Museum of the Arts, Miami Art Museum, Tampa Museum of Art, the University of Wyoming Art Museum, and Montclair Art Museum. In 2010, a survey exhibition of Cole's work on paper took place at the James Gallery of the Graduate Center of the City University of New York and traveled to Memphis Brooks Museum of Art, Sarah Moody Gallery of Art, University of Alabama, and the Rowan University of Art, New Jersey. In 2011, several of Cole's sculptures were included in Reconfiguring an African Icon, Odes to the Mask by the Modern and Contemporary Artists from Three Continents at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. In 2013, a traveling exhibition, Complex Conversations, Willie Cole Sculptures and Wall Works, opened at the Albertine Monroe Brown Gallery at Western Michigan University. And in 2016, his work was included in Disguise, Mask and Global African Art at the Brooklyn Museum. Willie Cole on site opened at the David C. Driscoll Center, University of Maryland, and traveled to the Museum of Art at the University of New Hampshire and Arthur Ross Gallery, Philadelphia in 2016. In 2019, Willie Cole Beauties opened at the Radcliffe Institute at Harvard University, as well as Willie Cole Bella Figura at Alexander and Bonin in New York City. I'm excited to welcome Willie Cole and have a conversation with him tonight about his career and so many other things that I'd love to discuss with him. Hey, Willie, how are you?
Hey, Dexter, good to see you. How are you?
I'm good, I'm good. I hope the audio is good on my end. Can you hear me? Everything fine?
I hear you loud and clear.
That's fantastic. So there's so many things I want to talk to you about this evening, but I guess, I'll take it from the perspective of the people who are joining us that may not be as familiar with your work as I am. Let's go back in time a little bit. We can go back in time as far as you'd like. We're not going to go back to diapers and crawling, but we want to go back to Willie Cole before anyone knew who Willie Cole was. Can you tell us a little bit about that moment in your life when you knew that you were an artist?
Well, you don't want to go back to diapers, but I knew I was an artist at the age of 3.
Okay, well, there we go. We're back to diapers.
At the age of 3, my mom found me in the kitchen drawing the Sunday comics. And from that moment on, my family always called me the little artist.
Um,
So I've had it in my mind for decades.
That's fantastic. And were you encouraged along the way? I mean, I've talked to many artists who had that nurtured, but equally, I've talked to many artists whose family did not nurture that creative spark.
Well, they nurtured the spark, to use your word, but they didn't encourage the career because nobody knew how artists made a living. They always said artists don't make money, you have to die to make money, blah, blah, blah. But they encouraged my creativity 100%.
That's interesting. And I think that that's kind of like what you would call like a first generation problem when someone in the family takes a path that no one else in the family has taken before them. There's no template, there's no roadmap. And so it takes a lot of faith. I think that may be the word for a mother or a father to see their kid wanting to do something that's somewhat unprecedented in the family, unprecedented, and still push them in that direction. I remember reading something, and I don't know where, that talked about an epiphany moment you had when you saw an appliance on the street somewhere. And I don't know what age you were, and I'm quite sure that was much further along than when you were 3 years old drawing comics. But can you tell us about that moment and maybe preface it a bit more, because I'm struggling to remember where I read that.
Yes, in 1988, I was honored to be an artist in residence at the Studio Museum in Harlem. My studio was in Newark, and in my studio, I was making paintings and sculptures that were made out of sheet metal, because one of my neighbors made air-conditioned ducts. So they threw away lots of strips, long strips of metal, and I would get those and weave them together to make clothing. Not to be worn, but to be displayed, like Full Metal Jacket kind of stuff, and stuff for the body. So when I got the residency in Harlem, I could not carry that metal to Harlem from Newark. I didn't have a car. I couldn't carry it on the PATH train. So, but I would walk from my loft to the Penn Station in Newark every day to go to Harlem. And on one of those walks, I saw the iron on the street that had been run over by a car. And when I saw it, I didn't pick it up the first day, but maybe by the third day, I looked at it and I saw it as a mask, as a Dan mask from Liberia. So I brought it back to the studio and took out a camera, took a lot of photos of it, hung them all around, and just looked at it every day. And it started to tell me, or maybe suggest to me, what I should be doing in terms of my art production. And I just followed through.
Did that object then inspire you to look at other objects differently?
Yeah. It's like, it was almost like puberty. Your body is one thing one year, and then next thing you know, it's got different decorations all around it, and everything changes. So it was kind of like that. It did inspire me. I had a friend of mine, an artist named James Andrew Brown, who said that my eye was now wide open. Prior to that, maybe my thought patterns kept me in a limited perception, state. But yeah, that definitely changed the way that everything since then has been different when I look at it.
And can you talk a little bit about some of the other materials that you use in your work? There's a line that I didn't read in your bio, but this is something that, whenever I have conversations about Willie Cole, those conversations inevitably lead to things like ironing boards and shoes and whatnot.
Right.
And I just want to kind of talk a little bit about that. Your choice of materials. I mean, what are you looking for? Or maybe it finds you. Can you kind of talk about that process of choosing materials?
Yes, I don't really choose materials. I kind of just live to feel stuff, to feel like the vibration. Like if I look at a person, I get a certain feeling from that. So every object that I've used as an art material, I would say, as you just said, the material has found me. Now, that was from '88 forward.
Right.
Prior to that, I was making a lot of jewelry out of small metal things. And I would walk the streets and look for those things, not knowing what I would find, but just something small to make a necklace or a bracelet or a belt with. So, I had the habit of walking and looking at the ground and looking at things. And it just blossomed after '88. And I got to a point where I knew that if I needed an iron, just go for a walk and one would find me. And it always worked out.
And so that was an experience you mentioned that was in Newark, New Jersey. So you were born in New Jersey. Mm-hmm. And you still live in New Jersey now. And how has place affected your work? I know you travel quite a bit, but how has being from where you are, how has that influenced the work that you make, if at all?
Right. Well, when I lived in the big city, it was 100% influence because that was my development stage. I went to grammar school and high school there. All my friends, we went to a high school, arts high school for art and music. So all my friends were artists. So we were all kind of maturating together. We were all cultivating our creativity, etc. together. Also, in the urban area, there are a lot of, at least in New York, there's a lot of garbage on the streets. So if you're making things out of found objects, they're everywhere. And I could even say at the point after my art had transitioned, my life hadn't transitioned yet. And I had a job as a computer graphics artist. But I worked on the night shift. And every morning when I came home, I would see this homeless guy on the street. And he and I became good friends. Mm-hmm. So I don't get that where I live now. But at that point, that was very inspirational for me. So the whole urban experience, from homelessness to trash on the street to noise, that all inspired me at that time. And I still carry that inspiration, but I live in a different kind of environment now, and I'm more inspired by the sounds of nature and the silence. We had a windstorm a few days ago, and it was like a choir outside. It was like Oya's choir. Beautiful.
Talk to me a little bit more about, coming up as an artist. Did you spend a significant amount of time in Newark?
Yes, I spent a significant amount of time in Newark and some time in Los Angeles. My mother's family is from LA.
Okay.
So I've gone there in the summers, and my grandmother lived in the suburbs of New Jersey, in Somerville, New Jersey. And my great grandfather lived in the area that is now Rutgers University, back when it was all farmland.
Mm-hmm.
I spent every summer with my great grandfather. Well, excuse me, not every summer. I spent many summers with my great grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
He had a chicken farm there, but he also was a minister with a big church in Jersey City. And I spent a lot of time with him there as well.
Did you have an artist space at some point in your career, like a gallery or artist space? I remember also in doing some research, and I
Yes,
came across
yes.
an interview when you were talking about that experience.
You know, when I'm trying not to make it such a long story.
We have time.
So when I was in college at School of Visual Arts, I was in theater also at the same time.
Okay.
I worked as a set painter at the National Black Theater in Harlem, and I was in the Actors Development Workshop at the Negro Ensemble Company. So my first job after school was as an actor, artist in resident at the University of Delaware. When I came back from Delaware, I moved into a loft in Newark, and I got this job doing computer graphics. But I was in this big, beautiful loft. But I was just a graphic designer. I just needed a drawing table in a small space. So I turned the space into a gallery probably for about 3 or 4 years. And I think around 83 or 84, I got my first deal over the city. And that kind of changed my whole way of thinking about moving forward. The graphic design approach came from my parents. Say, if you want to make a living as an artist, you got to be a graphic designer.
Well,
which wasn't true either, but I tried that.
Yeah, but that's back to like the family giving you that practical advice, right? Yeah. Well, you better get a job.
Hey, job at the post office was my mom's offer. The job at the plant was my father's offer. And I actually worked with my dad at the factory for maybe about 6 months.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the reason I wanted to talk about that trajectory is that I always think it's important for, assuming that some of the people joining us this evening are artists as well, right? It's always important, I think, for artists who are emerging to hear a little bit about the journey of artists that are further along in their career than they are, to kind of understand that there will be these potential twists and turns, and that there will be these moments where you're doing something seemingly unrelated to being an artist, but it all kind of feeds into the same kind of thing.
At least you have to convince yourself that it feeds into the same thing. Like when I worked at the chemical factory, their main product was paint. So I said, okay, well, I'm still, still in the line. I'm just not in the position I want to be in. But I worked at a factory that made paint.
Right. I mean, I think that that's like a common, not necessarily working in a factory that makes paint, but I think it's just like a common part of many of our lives. I mean, even my work as a curator, have often found myself, I'm an independent curator. So I find myself trying to figure out other ways to sort of like connect the dots as I'm building on other things. And then you work in the arts, that kind of becomes part of your journey. I want to switch gears a little bit before we look at some of your work in the slideshow. And I want to talk a little bit more about like the underpinnings of your work. And what I mean by that is I get the sense, and we've never had this conversation, this conversation, I get the sense that there's an immense amount of spirituality in your work. I get that sense. And I just wanted to kind of talk to you a little bit about that, like how is your own faith or spirituality. And again, I don't want to get more personal than you want to get, but I just want to kind of understand if any of your like personal faith and spirituality informs your work.
I think that every human's life is informed by their faith and their spirituality, even if they use different words for it. In my case, everything in my life has informed the work, but I do spend a lot of time thinking about larger, to me, larger spiritual issues, issues like about creation and existence and life and death, in a literal sense, life and death, but not living and dying.
Right. I understand. I understand. So we
And
have yeah, we have some images of works that we're going to put up on the screen and talk a little bit about some of these pieces. So this looks like more of a, it's the whole object. It's cut off a little bit, so it could be kind of considered a detail. But let's talk about this piece here. And you can share as much as you like. We have about a half dozen images we'll look at.
okay, well, this piece is in the series called Mother and Child. So it's just a baby on the back of a female. This is a side view, and it's made out of high heel shoes. High heel shoes, kind of like the iron, they just hit me one day when I saw them. So I started making art out of them. Mother and Child, because it's just in my awareness, a common subject matter in art, through the centuries, mother and child. I remember as a little kid, I saw the Pietà at the World's Fair, and that was a mother and child image. So it's kind of in that same vein. These shoe pieces are inspired by African art, various tribal aesthetics. This one is kind of like, I would say it's kind of Senufu-ish, actually, especially the mother.
Hmm.
The great achievement for me in this piece is that I was able to make a head out of just 2 shoes. Like 5 years ago, that head would have had like 30 shoes in it. So that's how I measure, or that brings me to the awareness of my growth in this whole journey. This piece is bronze, and it's an edition of 7. It's life size at this point, but most of my shoe pieces, I cast them in 3 sizes, and life size, then 4 feet, and then 6 to 8 feet.
Yeah, I've seen one of the really large ones at Newark Museum, and
This was my first piece finished during the pandemic as well.
oh, fantastic! So it's a relatively recent one. Great.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the next image. To me, this is like a quintessential Willie Cole.
Yeah, it's interesting to me how I went from becoming the Iron Man or Willie the Scorch to Willie Schumacher or the Shoe Man. And, people like my dealer, my best friend, didn't think that was possible. Somehow, some people think an artist has only one idea and they'll do it the rest of their lives. And a lot of artists do that. But everything I do with the shoe, I learned from the iron, and I can do it with any object. But this piece is called it's called Street Dragon. It is unintentionally a portrait of a friend of mine named Linda Street, and that's why I call it the Street Dragon. Now it doesn't look exactly like her, but it has her style. It's got like a nice urban funk to it. I mean, I could see George Clinton wearing this as a mask during the Funkadelic concert.
Yeah, I can see that too.
And that feeling, and these pieces are not planned, they just play. At this time, this was on my show in 2019 in New York City at Alexander Bonin Gallery. But in that time, I would just go to my shoe studio every night at 11 o'clock and just play, bang them together, see what fits, what plugs in. It's a lot like having a jigsaw puzzle with no picture on the box. It's something, but you have to like move it around to see what it is.
Sorry, I just heard you say the words shoe studio.
Right.
You gotta tell me a little bit more about your shoe studio.
Yeah, my studio for the past 12 years has been in my house. So different rooms are different studios. Like right now, this room I'm in now is starting to become, at least half of it has become more like the water bottle studio. The other half has been like the drawing studio. But it's starting to get mixed in a little bit. But
Right.
for shoes and wood and printmaking, I have a different room for those things.
Fantastic. Let's move on to the next image as well. So if I'm not mistaken, this is part of a collaboration or maybe you can tell me a bit more about it, because this is obviously quite different than the images we've seen before this.
Right. Well, I don't know how it looks to you or the audience, but if you zoom in, his clothing has the images of my shoe sculptures all over the shirt and the jacket. And on his head, he's wearing a headpiece made out of high heel shoes that I also made. So this was a collaboration, and this is from a fashion show in Tokyo in January. The designer is Raya Kubakawa, and her line is Comme des Garçons. So I was commissioned to make the headpieces for her and to collaborate on some of the clothing.
Is that kind of thing common? Have you had other opportunities to collaborate with brands? Is that something that interests you?
It is something that interests me. I mean, I've had some brand sponsors before, but I have not had a direct collaboration until this time.
Hmm.
And I have one coming up with Yamaha guitars. I just
Really?
received 75 acoustic guitars last week, and the plan is for me to make sculpture of these guitars and then sell them to raise money for music education.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Will that be the first time you've worked with guitars?
Oh man. I don't know if these questions are loaded or you're just freestyling, but I've had guitars around me my whole life, and I've taken them apart just like irons. In this room now, I have several guitars that I'm working on. So I played with the guitar as an art material, but I have only one piece that I saw as a finished work of art.
Hmm.
And that was in a show in New York probably about 10 years ago.
Hmm. Well, you got to keep me posted on this new project, because I'm very curious to see what you do with 75 guitars.
Yeah, yeah. And I've also done stuff with, well, I've had a sponsor of Coca-Cola to make things out of the Dasani water bottle.
Ah.
So
let's advance to the next image. So this is very different than anything we've discussed up until this moment. So I'm curious to hear what this piece is about.
Yes, this shows my roots in graphic design. And this was a commission from one of my collectors. And it was prompted by the discovery of a piece of the wreckage from the Clotilda slave ship, which was the last slave ship to come to the US. It came after the importation of slaves was abolished in this country.
Hmm.
And this particular gentleman, I guess I call him a gentleman, he felt that he could, break the rules and still bring in a boatload of Africans. So he brought them into Mobile Bay, Alabama, and they were all from Benin. That's why the yellow, green, and red, those are colors of the Benin flag. The ship up there is the Clotilda. But he brought them into Mobile Bay, and then he destroyed the big ship and put them in small boats to try to disperse them, to make his sales. That is SALES. But he got busted, and he went to jail, of course. But the people that he brought here from Africa settled in that area and started a town called Africa Town. So my collector's idea was to make this print to raise money for Africa Town, because it's been through a lot of hardship, over the centuries, over the decades, I should say.
So
I should say this image is based on the Alabama crest.
Okay.
The original crest has an eagle on each side, and it has the flag of the United States in the middle, surrounded by all the countries that are welcome, all the European countries. So I kind of modified that to speak more about this issue. And the label at the bottom actually translates into something like our right to defend our freedom.
You mentioned Africa quite a bit as a sort of reference point or influence on your work. How deep does that connection go? Is Africa a continent you've visited? Has it informed a lot of your work, different African countries? Can you talk a little bit about that connection?
Yeah, and again, I'll try to keep it brief, but I'm the generation that went from being Negro to being black. So during that transition, a lot of African thought was laid heavily on us as kids. I
Yeah,
remember in my high school, we were studying the Renaissance, and then suddenly we were studying African art, and it was a brand new, I'm talking about 1969, so it was a whole new awareness. We weren't
right.
that far out of the civil rights era. Um, so when I got to college, though, I had Rosalind Jeffries, the wife of Leonard Jeffries, as an African art teacher,
Really?
or I should say. Yep. So that was very informative to me. And when I lived in Newark, I lived in a loft, and one of my neighbors was an art dealer from the Leonard Kahan Gallery in Soho. That gallery sells African art. And this gentleman was a principal in that gallery. He was one of my best friend. So I would go to his loft, and I could actually have an intimate relationship with the art objects. I could put on a tribal mask, or I could blow an ivory horn. So that kind of deepened the relationship with it as well. And there was a bookstore in Harlem called the Tree of Life Bookstore back in the 70s that was a place for knowledge, like a university. It was on the corner of 125th and Lenox Avenue. And I
Mm-hmm.
took a lot of classes there back in the 70s and 80s,
Mm-hmm.
studying African history and African religion and herbal medicine and Christianity, all kinds of stuff. And yeah, I traveled to Africa. I've traveled only to South Africa though,
Mm-hmm.
but I also had a 15-year marriage to a woman who was a dancer who had traveled all over Africa and was well informed about everything African. So all that inspired me.
Let's look at the next image in the series. So this
Um,
again, yeah, I think it's like iconic Willie Cole
right.
piece here with the scorching using the irons. Can you tell me was did you see an ironing board burned and and that was inspired by that, or did you decide that you were going to use the iron as a brand?
Well, when I had the studio in Harlem, I was making figurative sculptures in what I thought of as sacred postures. Sacred postures are the postures that are most prevalent in most tribal art. For example, women holding their breasts, uh, people down on two knees, things like that. And I knew that in the tradition of a lot of various cultural groups, but among the Yoruba, these little wooden statues, they had power. They may have been they may have been given power through some sort of ritual. Of course, I know in the Native American belief system, you didn't just cut down a tree to carve it. You had to get engaged with the tree. The tree was a gift to you, so you had to honor the tree. So, in my experience with that awareness, I asked myself, what is the spiritual power of an iron? And how can I show that? And it clicked in my head, the power of the iron is visible in the scorch. And that led me to scorching. But on the esoteric side, in my loft at that time, I started seeing scorches on the floor. And
Hmm.
I've been living there for probably 8 or 9 years and never noticed these scorches on the floor. But it used to be a sweatshop, and I guess they dropped the irons a few times. So all these things kind of came together at the same time and
That's
led me
amazing.
to these pieces.
That's amazing. You were meant to be in that space.
Yeah, yes.
So I think we have one more image that we can discuss here, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so this is a bit different. So if I'm not mistaken, these are not manipulated appliances, but they are documented.
Yes, exactly. Um,
Why the
these are
different approach?
yeah, these are digital prints done at the Quality House of Graphics. I think it was located in Queens, New York. But I was a artist in resident at the Judy Brodsky Center at Rutgers University,
Hmm.
and they were approached about buying equipment from the Quality House of Graphics. They were about to go out of business, and they held us digital equipment. So I got to go there and use the equipment during that time. And the 2 years prior to that, Uh, I had been encouraged to photograph every iron that I used because I've had so many irons. I mean, I've had thousands of irons. I still have thousands of irons. And from the aerial perspective, they all became masks and faces to me. So I just kind of used that as motivation for these pieces here. And there's a series of them, so there are probably about 10 different ones available.
It's great work. I want to switch gears. So I think that's the last image in the slide. So now we can just go back to you in your space and talk a bit more. We did have a question come in. I guess someone out there loves jewelry and wanted to know, did you sell the jewelry that you made, or did you keep it?
Oh, no, I made it for myself. It was all for me to wear it. You know, School of Visual Arts in the 70s was like, it was a crazy place to be. I mean, we had students walking around dressed like Batman. Everybody had their own identity. So I had jewelry that I made out of rusty metal things.
So there's a sculpture behind you that appears to be made of water bottles, and you referenced water bottles a bit earlier in our conversation. So I just want to talk a little bit about what's in your studio. So we should start with that piece. Can you tell me about this work, how it came to be?
Yes, the piece behind me is a commission piece for one of my, I guess he'll be my collector once it's in his house. But chandeliers out of water bottles came to me in a dream. The dream was prompted by an opportunity to have an exhibition at Grounds for Sculpture in Hamilton, New Jersey. And there was no budget for the show. I was drinking water, and I recognized that the bottle has all these lines in it here, so you can crush it easily. So after that meeting, I actually crushed a bottle and turned it into a fish. And right away, I convinced myself that I can make anything out of water bottles. Now, I'd already believed I could make anything out of anything already. I mean, one of my models is anything out of everything and everything out of anything. But I proved it with a bottle on that day, and that night I dreamed about it. And in my dream, I saw a chandelier with a picture of Buddha in every bottle. I call it the Buddha chandelier, and that was the first one I've made. That was in 2012.
Hmm.
Since then, the water bottles have just so much potential for me. You know, I get a lot of commissions with water bottles and mostly chandeliers.
And so you mentioned that in your house, different rooms have kind of taken on different roles. You have your shoe studio. Now this is kind of becoming like a space, a mixed space.
Right.
Do you make all of your work, in your home studio? Is there a secondary space where you're also making work?
In the past 12 years, my secondary space has been my front yard. Most of my larger water bottle pieces have been made in the front yard. And in the image you showed with the two ironing boards, behind them was a giant painting, a painting that was 5 feet by 9 feet. I made those in the backyard. And on the side of the house, I have a patio that I call my scorch pad, where I have a forge, and I do my scorching on wood in that location. So pretty much that's how it goes. I mean, I've made some pieces out of bicycles that I would kind of bolt together and then take them to a welding shop about 3 miles from here and finish them there. But mostly everything happens right here in this space these days.
I want to talk a little bit more about the things that have influenced you as an artist as well. Because I think we kind of touched on it a bit, and you did mention the names of a couple of other artists that I guess were contemporaries of yours. But at this stage in your career, as you're thinking about the artists that you've become, can you tell me some of the artists who've had the greatest influence on you?
The artists who've influenced me in the past, each one has a different place, of course. In terms of this whole idea of single objects, was kind of inspired by Armand, and by Carl Andre. I didn't recognize it at the time, but I was a big fan of their work, and I still am. Of course, Armand has passed away. But that awareness, that concept of one thing becoming many things, is also connected to Buddhism. So that is a big inspiration for the structural quality of the work. Um,
Which is also quite interesting, using water bottles that are, generally recycle or recyclable, and then sort of thinking about that circle of life. It's an interesting kind of sort of analogous in some ways. Um, but I also wanted to talk about, these phases that your work has gone through. You and I were corresponding over the past few days, and kind of, I was trying to figure out exactly like what I was going to put in your bio to sort of share with the people joining us here. And you mentioned these different segments of your work. I think you referenced Dada, you referenced different other sort of art movements, and I was curious about that, and we have some time, so I wanted to kind of understand more about these different, let's call them eras of Willie Cole, like what has happened over the decades.
right. Well, I feel that if this can be called a gift, I feel that the gift is creativity, and you can apply it to anything. You know, I feel that you should go through life open to life. Once you define something, you're restricting it. Like I'm sitting in a chair, so this will always just be a chair. But it could be more. It could be plastic, leather, and wood, and stuffing. You know, so for me, with the awareness that just creativity can be applied to anything, that's what I do. I apply it to anything, and it can't be limited to any material. But some of the artists that I think about would be Dennis Oppenheim, uh, who used various materials. I always liked what he did, and I never wanted to be an artist who just did one thing. You know, it's like you make a hit record, in 4/4 time in the key of E flat, and every song you make after that sounds just like it. That's not the way I want to be as a person or as an artist.
Mm. Someone asked a question, going back to your collaboration with Comme des Garçons. They want to know, how did that come into fruition? Was it an email, or was it a long conversation? How did that collaboration happen?
Well, I spoke with one of the principals of that company, Adrian Jaffe, on the phone, and he just said that Ray, who is the main designer, wants to collaborate with you. He found me because one of their employees saw my work in a magazine and laid it on his desk. And when he showed it to Ray, she got excited about the work. So that's how it came about. So they were looking for me. They found me through my gallery in New York. The gallery asked me if I'd be interested, and then I got the call, and Adrian and I discussed it.
It's interesting because, it goes without saying that some artists, really welcome these kinds of collaborations, while others shy away from them, don't want to be in any way associated with brands or what have you. Why do you have such a comfort level working with brands?
That's a good question. I think it's because I feel like I am not limited by by definitions. To say that I'm a this, or I'm a that, or I'm a this, I'm a that, and that sticks with me the rest of my life. It's just that evolution is an opportunity to spread the word, to share the creativity, to collect new energy, and to create new work, create new audiences. So, and there was a time when I felt that I was making trinkets for the rich. There's another time I felt like I was just an exaggerated toy maker. So just to break out of those thoughts when they jump on me, to do something totally different.
Um, you reference music, and the whole idea that a musician can get trapped in that loop of more or less making the same song, like over and over and over again. And I see that happening with certain artists as well. And I think a lot of it has to do with the way, maybe in some cases art dealers sort of tell an artist, well, this is what sells and you need to make more of this. If you try that, no one's going to buy it.
That's true. That's
I'm,
true.
I'm-
But if I may, the the challenge is that you don't make art just to sell art. You know,
hmm.
your creativity, your connection to creative energy is something that is in you, dealer or no dealer. So, and often the dealers have to catch up with the artists. Like
Right.
my water bottle pieces have not been shown much in galleries, but I've made a lot of them. I mean, I have a storage house a couple miles from me that's filled with water bottle works, and I've probably had like 12 water bottle commissions in the past 12 since 2012. But it's not my gallery shtick, but it is something that's important to me and obviously a lot of other people too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's critical. This idea of not getting caught up in chasing the idea of making work because there's someone on the other side of it that wants to buy it. There's always about this transaction, and I think a lot of really really new artists, not even call them young artists, let's call them new artists, don't quite get that because of the heightened demand for Black art, particularly. And that's a whole nother conversation that we can even have about what the hell is that even anyway, like what is it as a definition, terminology, Black art. But right now there seems to just be so much attention being showered on the kind of current generation of Black artists. And is there any because I know whether you talk about this or not, you probably think about it. Do you have any insights? Having a career as successful, I consider you to be a very successful artist. I consider you to be really exemplary, like artists of our time, someone who in their time and also in the future will be seen as someone who carved out a very specific language of art making. Um, but what do you think about the current state of things? And maybe it's not a negative. I mean, you might think everything going on right now in the art world is perfectly fine, but I'm just kind of curious to get your take on the state of things right now.
It's a tough one. Um, I see a lot of art that I don't know, I've kind of started to see categories in what is an artist. Like you can be known for your personality, you could be known for your technical ability, or you could be known for your creativity. And I think that technical ability right now is what people have focused on with Black artists. And I'm referring most to as Black figurative painters. To me, that is a technique. You know, in the 70s, realism was the technique in New York. Everybody that went to school in the 70s learned photorealistic painting. My teacher in the 70s was Chuck Close. Um, and I know that in the 60s and 70s, Black art was definitely predominantly figurative because we were seeking identity. So we wanted to paint images from our environment and all those kind of things. And that's what makes the term so maybe unclear or contradictory or challenging because Black means one thing and art means something else, but the two of them together can use a little bit more definition, you know? For me, it's just art created by artists of color, and that's what Black art is.
Would you say it's a bit of a philosophical question? Maybe not my only philosophical question for the evening, but would
I
you
like
say
the
you are striving to achieve something specific, or is it all about the process of discovery? Like, is there someplace you're trying to go with your work, or is it just is it the process?
yeah. I am seeking to be like you turn on you turn on the TV or radio, the stream just comes.
Hmm.
That's where I'm going. You know, I want to go where John Coltrane went. You know, when John picked up his horn, he didn't have to think about it because picking up the horn was the same as lifting up his arm. You
Mm.
know, his instrument was such a part of him; it didn't require any thought; it was natural. So I want to be there, um, and that requires, of course, being at it every day, but not as a task or a chore, but just as a breath. Just to be in that, to have that awareness every day is the key.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you talked about, sort of like changing perspectives over time, and I can definitely relate to that. I found myself maybe some years ago being much more critical is not the right word because we all need to be critical, but I had to start to understand that the artists that I interact with or that I know, I mean, a lot of their work is driven by who they are as an individual, regardless of what's going on around them. And what they may be pursuing may not necessarily be my idea of what an artist should or shouldn't be pursuing, but I also don't have the right to assert my own idea of what a path for anyone should be. And so, for lack of a better way to put it, I had to chill out and kind of think about things from a very, very different, more open-minded perspective. And I think that in my heart of hearts, because I'm a probably hopelessly romantic person, but in my heart of hearts, I always like the idea of someone trying to achieve some form or some level of mastery, whatever that is.
Mhm.
And I had to begin to accept that every artist is on their own journey. And maybe an artist, maybe a particular artist does want to just simply make the same thing over and over and over. And that's fine too, because that could be its own journey.
That's true. That's like a meditation.
Right, right.
You just have the same chant for 2 hours every day of your life. It takes you somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. And
But
I
I
think if we don't look at everything from a public lens, and certainly not from a commercial lens, then it kind of goes back to something you said already, and that is, you know, all the art you make doesn't have to be about selling that art or making it for someone else. In many ways, you are making it for yourself. And what you get out of it as the artist might actually be more important than what the viewer or the observer gets out of it.
Yes, I would agree with that. Well, the one thing I get out of it is getting out of my head,
Right.
moving it on to make room for other things. But I feel that this so-called creativity is in the air. It's like a force in the universe, like gravity. We can't see it, but it's always there. So the people who have the ability to tap into it have to understand it and understand, why they can tap into it and what they will do with it, and why them. So for me, it's like I just move on faith. I move that I'm making things. People see them and have reactions to them. People are inspired by the journey. Sometimes the work reveals aspects of human existence over time. Like the water bottles to me are very spiritual because of the light, the way they collect the light. I mean, it's crazy, but a pile of water bottles in the sun, man, it's like an angel. The presence of the light. The whole
Yeah.
metaphor about the water. The water is the liquid of life. You pour it in your mouth, your air goes in the bottle. All those to me are like very spiritual acts. So presenting those things with the potential of making other people aware of those things in a deeper way is what it's about. And just freeing myself up,
We had another
getting to the point where I can do things.
we had another question come in that I wanted to ask you, and that is, do you see your artwork and practice as a means of addressing the myth of Black identity?
No, I don't. I don't see my art as a means to express or respond to the myth of Black identity at all. I don't make my art with race in mind, because I recognize that you see this guy on the screen, but that's not who this is. That's just what he's driving. You know what I mean? The the thing inside is making the art, not the vehicle. So I don't make my art based on racial identity. Of course, I'm dealing with the mind, I'm dealing with the spirit, I'm dealing with the body, and the mind is racing, it's recalling, it's remembering, it's reflecting, it's fearing. So those things come into play, but they just flow and it all flows together. It's like three rivers coming together to make the work. But I definitely don't think of myself as a race maker or a race baiter of any kind.
Right.
I've had a couple of moments where I thought I was making personal mythology, like when the first Gulf War broke out. I felt that I needed to do something that was more applicable to that. When 9/11 came, I felt I needed to do something more applicable to that. But so there are times when you have to respond, or where I feel need to respond to things in the world, but I still respond to those things through my own lens. So they are not overtly seen as like a newscast.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, how have you navigated that? And I think that's like a really, important thing to sort of explore. I know artists of all different backgrounds, ages, nationalities, gender orientation, and everyone has their own. Everyone has a box that someone's trying to put them in. Like it's always the case. I got a box people try to put. Everyone's got a box, and for you, how have you avoided that box?
Well, I have to attribute that to my dealer, my current dealer, Carol Alexander, because when I joined her gallery in 1990, she told me that I was just an artist. I wasn't a Black artist. I was just an artist. And to make that statement strong, I did not, or perhaps she didn't allow me to be in shows that were curated based on race for many years. I mean, our relationship goes to almost 40 years now. So now I'll show just to be part of the group. I'll show because a friend is curating it. But initially, it was about not being pigeonholed.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, go
The
ahead.
funny thing about that is before I was with that gallery that I joined, I think in 1990, I was showing all over New Jersey, mostly New Jersey. And I knew I could get a review every Black History Month. So when I started looking for a dealer, I had a stack of reviews and everything. They were all in February, but over different years. But once I got into the mainstream, it was not, you got to break out of those limitations. Nothing in nature is meant to be stagnant.
Right.
Including artists.
Right. So you mentioned that you had made some work that was in response to the Gulf War. So that's like 91. And then also 9/11, which unbelievably is 20 years ago this September. We could have a drink about that. That's a whole nother trip. That 20 years has gone by since that. But last year was obviously another one of those kinds of years, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, did you make any work that was not inspired by? I mean, that's not really the question, inspired by. But how did last year affect you?
Right. Well, a lot happened last year.
Yeah. To say the least.
The biggest impact last year had on me was this whole truism about living one day at a time became very real for me. And I even got to the point where we don't live 1 year at a time, we live one breath at a time.
Mm.
I mean, and the life force is so strong that we can't drink a big cup. We just got to take sips and let it out.
Mhm.
So that awareness of time and mortality became very strong for me. In
Yep.
terms of the political thing, after the murder of George Floyd, I had jokingly started referring to myself. I mean, it's kind of like David Bowie has all these characters. Every album was a different character. So, and he's a Capricorn also. So I think that may be an astrological thing. I just started doing the same thing. So I was Willie Water Bottle. I was Willie the Scorch. I was Willie Schumacher. Those are my main three. You know? But when I thought of Willie the Scorch, I said, now, if I was in the mafia as a black man, they'd probably call me Willie the Scorch. You know? And I remember, and maybe this was the inspiration, but I had a review in the New York Times once where the writer said that the scorches in my piece represented the various skin tones of black people.
Wow.
I hadn't thought of that before. I
Yeah.
didn't see that at all. When he said that, of course, it made sense. So when George Floyd was murdered, I made charts, I think 8 feet by 8 feet, with 88 scorches, and the name of a person, each person that had been killed in police custody under the scorch. So I was inspired by that, and I made that in 3 panels because there are thousands of people that have been killed since the 70s in police custody. But I took about 300 of them and made these pieces.
Well, I really have enjoyed talking to you. We could probably go on and go on. I have about 10 other questions I want to ask, but unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. So Willie Cole, I want to thank you for being so generous with your time and your insights. And this is a rare opportunity. I haven't had an in-depth conversation with you in a very long time, and I really enjoyed talking to you. So just want to thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you, Dexter. It's good to see you again.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this concludes our conversation. I want to thank everyone else for joining us tonight. The Gantt Center is proud to provide programs to the community that highlight arts and culture. With your support, the Gantt Center can expand their connection to the community it serves by texting the word unmasked to the number 345-345. You can conveniently support the continuation of programs and initiatives that celebrate the culture. To learn more about the ways you can support the Gantt Center, visit their website, ganttcenter.org. Stay tuned for next month's must-see open-air conversation on April 13th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, as I discuss the artist's journey with a special featured artist that's in the current Gantt exhibition, Vision and Spirit, African-American Artworks from the Bank of America collection. Thank you all again for joining us, and good night.